The year was 1883, and the Union Pacific's Western Star roared across the vast, unbroken expanse of the Wyoming plains. It was a defiant, shuddering steel beast, spitting smoke and ambition, tearing a path through a land that had known only wind and buffalo. My name's Elijah Thorne, 27 years old, a railroad surveyor by trade, and a man who believed in blueprints, straight lines, and the unyielding logic of steel. I was on my way to a new assignment, mapping new routes, further west, leaving behind the stifling familiarity of the East for the raw promise of the frontier. Inside car B7, the air was thick with the cloying sweetness of cheap cigar smoke, the nervous chatter of families, and the faint, unsettling scent of unwashed bodies. They were all pilgrims like me, heading for new lives, their faces a worn tapestry of hope and trepidation. The rhythmic, almost hypnotic clack-clack-clack of the wheels against the rails was a constant, monotonous lullaby, occasionally punctuated by the mournful shriek of the whistle as we devoured mile after dusty mile. Outside, the landscape was a blur of sagebrush and jagged rock, occasionally broken by the fleeting, deceptive glimpse of a distant, shimmering mesa. The sheer emptiness of it all was almost deafening. The unease, a cold prickle on the back of my neck, started subtly. It rippled through the car the moment he boarded at a forgotten dusty stop near the reservation line, little more than a water tower and a lean-to shack. He was a Sioux man, tall and lean, his frame almost too broad for the narrow aisle. His face, weathered by sun and wind, was a landscape of stoic dignity, and his long dark braids, intricately woven with strips of leather, fell over his buckskin tunic. He moved with a quiet, almost unsettling grace that felt profoundly out of place amidst the clatter and jostle of the cramped, noisy car. His eyes, dark as polished obsidian, seemed to hold the silent weight of generations, an ancient wisdom that made me feel for a moment like a blustering fool. Whispers, sharp as flint, immediately began to spread. "Savage!" a woman hissed, clutching her wide-eyed child closer to her voluminous skirt. "Trouble! Mark my words!" a grizzled rancher spat, his hand instinctively going to the worn stock of his carbine beneath his seat. The air grew heavy with suspicion, a palpable tension that choked the oxygen from the already stale atmosphere. I watched him from my seat, a faint, almost forbidden curiosity stirring within me, battling with the prejudices I'd absorbed since childhood. He settled himself by a grimy window, his gaze fixed on the receding plains, seemingly oblivious to the palpable fear and contempt radiating from the other passengers. But then I noticed it, a subtle twitch in the muscles of his jaw, a slight, almost imperceptible clench of his hands against his worn trousers. He felt it all, I realized, every hateful glance, every whispered insult. He chose simply not to react. Then came the jolt. Not a bump, not a simple sway, but a violent, sickening lurch that sent a wave of gasps and guttural cries through the car. The familiar clack, clack, clack suddenly fractured, becoming an uneven, desperate jarring. Clamor! A moment later, conductor Reginald Davies, a portly man whose face was usually florid with joviality, burst in, his usually ruddy complexion now ashen, his eyes wide with stark terror. "Something's wrong with the tracks ahead," he bellowed, his voice cracking. "Reports coming in from the forward car, a washout near Split Rock Creek. We're losing speed fast, but God help us, not fast enough." Panic, raw and guttural, erupted. Women screamed high-pitched and piercing. Children cried, their wails adding to the cacophony. Men cursed, their voices rough with fear and disbelief. The train swayed violently, its metallic groans echoing our own mounting terror. Outside, the landscape blurred into a dizzying streak of brown and grey, the vast emptiness a menacing blur. I gripped the armrests, my knuckles white, digging into the faded upholstery, my mind racing, calculating speed, distance, impact. A washout, I knew, meant a plunge into a jagged ravine, the horrifying crunch of breaking timber and twisting steel. Broken bones, splintered wood, and almost certainly no survivors. In that suffocating maelstrom of chaos and impending doom, my gaze involuntarily snapped across the aisle. The Sioux man, stoic as ever, had closed his eyes. His hand, however, was not clenched in fear, but pressed flat against the rattling window pane, as if listening, not with his ears, but with his very soul, to the secrets of the earth rushing past. The screams intensified, a horrifying crescendo as the train continued its perilous lurch, every metallic groan a death rattle reverberating through the entire car. I could hear the desperate, tortured shriek of the brakes, grinding uselessly against the accelerating momentum, a futile protest against the inevitable. The fear was no longer an abstract concept. It was a physical thing clawing at my throat, squeezing my lungs, tightening my chest until I could barely breathe. People were thrown from their seats, their bodies slamming against the wooden benches. Luggage tumbled from overhead racks, scattering hats, blankets, and personal effects across the grimy floor, each object a small, mundane tragedy. The air, filled with the acrid metallic smell of burnt metal and the sharp tang of human fear. In that maelstrom of deafening panic and crushing despair, my gaze involuntarily snapped back to the Sioux man. He was no longer a stoic statue. His eyes were wide open now, not with terror, as mine surely were, but with an intense, almost frantic focus, a clarity that defied the chaos around him. He wasn't looking out the window at the blurred, rushing landscape as we were, but rather through it, as if seeing something beyond the visible, an unseen truth in the very contours of the earth. His head was tilted, his ear almost pressed against the rattling glass, his long, dark braids swaying with the train's violent movements. "He's crazy!" someone shrieked from the back of the car, their voice thin with hysteria. "Look at him! The savage is communing with the devil. He'll bring us all down." But I saw something else. Something profound and unsettling. I saw profound concentration. His eyes darted, not wildly, not with panic, but with an almost predatory sharpness, scanning the ground, flashing by inches from the window, then the distant horizon, then back to the tracks, as if piecing together a complex, invisible puzzle. He was reading something deeply hidden, invisible to our Western eyes, to our maps and our instruments. He suddenly sprang up, moving with an astonishing agility and silent grace that utterly belied his previous calm demeanor. He didn't speak, but he pointed. His finger, lean and strong, jabbed towards the forward car, then swept in a wide, urgent arc towards the west, towards a faint, barely discernible rise in the distant plains, a place I had surveyed countless times and dismissed as insignificant. His movements were urgent, insistent, demanding to be understood. Conductor Davies, his uniform askew, overwhelmed and disoriented by the unfolding disaster, stumbled past, clutching at a seatback, his eyes wide and vacant with shock. "What in God's name is he doing?" Davies bellowed, his voice thick with a mixture of terror and raw, unadulterated anger. "Get back in your seat, you heathen! You'll incite a riot! You'll get yourself shot!" But the Sioux man, seemingly deaf to the insults, ignored him completely. He ran to the forward door of the car, wrenching it open with surprising force, exposing us to the roaring, wind-whipped chaos and the terrifying speed of our inevitable demise. He pointed again, more emphatically this time, his whole body tense with urgency. His voice finally broke free, a harsh, guttural plea, a string of rapid, melodic words in his native tongue that I couldn't understand, but whose urgency was unmistakable, cutting through the din of the dying train. He was pointing not at the immediate tracks, but towards a stretch of land that to my engineer's trained eye looked no different than any other flat, unremarkable terrain. But his sheer insistence, The unshakable force of his conviction made me pause, made my blood run cold. A sudden, audacious flicker of intuition, born of long hours mapping this treacherous territory, sparked in my logical, analytical mind. What if he saw something we couldn't? What if he was trying to tell us something vital, something that could save us all from the gaping maw of the washout? The idea was utterly audacious, almost unthinkable, completely against every rule of railroading. But the alternative was certain, agonizing death. The wind whipped past the open door, a terrifying guttural gale that shrieked like a banshee, threatening to rip us from the moving train. Conductor Davies stumbled towards the Sioux man, his face a contorted mask of fear and ingrained prejudice. "Get back inside, you fool! You'll kill us all with your damn superstitions." But I intervened, my surveyor's instincts, honed by years of reading the land, overriding my fear. I stepped firmly between them, my arms outstretched. "Hold on, conductor!" I yelled over the deafening roar, my voice raw. "He's trying to tell us something vital, something only he can see." Davies stared at me, dumbfounded, his mouth agape. "Are you mad, Thorne? He's a savage. They live by omens and spirits, not by engineering." I turned to the Sioux man, my eyes pleading for clarity amidst the chaos. His eyes, though still burning with intense focus, now held a desperate, urgent plea for understanding. He pointed again, not at the immediate tracks, but to the land beside. Them indicating a subtle, almost imperceptible dip in the contour, a fleeting change in the sparse vegetation, a barely visible ridgeline. Features that I, as a surveyor, should have noticed, should have catalogued, but had dismissed as insignificant. He made a sweeping, urgent motion with his hand, as if trying to draw an unseen path, a diversion. He spoke a few rapid, staccato words in his language, then pointed fiercely at the large brass lever that controlled the emergency brake, then motioned to the subtle rise in the land with urgent, desperate gestures. His gaze, full of an ancient, profound wisdom I couldn't articulate, but instinctively recognized, pleaded for me to comprehend, to grasp the unspoken message he was desperately conveying. Suddenly, with a jolt that felt like lightning striking my very core, I saw it. Not a hidden track, not a miraculous escape, but a subtle topographical feature. A gentle, almost invisible incline in the land, a natural, firm rise just off. The main doomed line. It wasn't designed for a train, wasn't on any map, but it was solid. It was a chance, a desperate, impossible chance to bleed off speed, to send the train partially off the main track and grind to a halt before hitting. The inevitable washout. It would be an uncontrolled derailment, brutal and violent, but a controlled slowdown rather than a full-speed plunge into the abyss. It was suicidal, perhaps, for the train, but far less suicidal for the lives inside it. He's saying to take the side grade, I yelled to Davies, pointing wildly at the same spot the Sioux man had indicated. It's a natural incline, a subtle slope. It'll slow us down. It's not a track, conductor, but it's solid ground, solid enough to bleed off speed. Davies stared, his jaw slack, his eyes wide with disbelief and a flicker of desperate hope. "Are you out of your mind, Thorne? We'll derail for certain. We'll flip. We're going to derail anyway, conductor." I roared back, my voice raw with the desperation of the moment. "This is our only shot. It's either a controlled crash or a plunge into oblivion." The Sioux man, sensing my desperate understanding, nodded frantically, his hand moving to indicate the emergency brake lever, his eyes burning with urgency. I knew the danger, the terrifying risk, the sheer absurdity of trusting a man deemed savage over my own years of engineering training, over the very logic that defined my world. But the image of the washout, of broken bodies and twisted metal, burned in my mind, a horrifying premonition. With a silent prayer for deliverance and a desperate surge of adrenaline, I lunged for the emergency brake lever, my hand slamming down on the cold metal. The Sioux man, with surprising powerful strength, helped me pull, his hands joining mine on the massive mechanism, forcing it into action. The train screamed in protest, metal grinding against metal, the entire car tilting violently as we careened off the main line. We were going off the rails, but hopefully not into the abyss. The world dissolved into a cacophony of screeching metal, groaning wood, and the horrifying sensation of the train leaving its designated path, a violent jolt that sent everyone sprawling. The emergency brakes shrieked, a deafening wail of protest, sparks showering from the wheels as the train lurched violently, agonizingly, off the main track. We slammed into the softer, angled earth of the natural incline, throwing us forward, then sideways. Passengers cried out, a chorus of terror and pain, luggage crashed down, and the entire car filled with dust and the smell of hot steel. But the momentum slowly, painstakingly, began to bleed off. The Sioux man, silent but resolute, braced himself. Against the wall, his eyes fixed on the ground ahead, tracking our slow, brutal descent. I held on for dear life, my muscles screaming, every bone rattling in my body, the vibrations shaking my teeth loose. We skidded, bounced, and finally, with a deafening, drawn-out groan of tortured steel, the train shuddered to a complete, shuddering halt. A mere handful of feet from the gaping, jagged maw of the washout at Split Rock Creek. A profound, almost sacred silence descended, broken only by the ragged, trembling breaths of the shaken passengers and the distant, cooling creaking of settling metal. No screams, no sounds of shattering bone, no twisted, splintered wreckage, just stillness. We were battered, bruised, covered in dust, but miraculously, incredibly alive. Conductor Davies, his face still pale, stumbled forward through the dazed passengers. He looked at the gaping chasm of the washout, then at the crooked, derailed train, then at me. And finally, his gaze resting on the Sioux man, his previous contempt replaced by a dawning, profound, almost tearful awe. How did you know?" he whispered, his voice thick with disbelief and a nascent reverence. The Sioux man, whose name I learned was Chaitin, meaning falcon in his language, simply looked at me. His dark eyes held a quiet understanding, a shared triumph that transcended words. He knew I had seen beyond the fear, beyond the crude, dehumanizing labels, to the ancient wisdom he carried. The passengers slowly began to stir, looking around in dazed wonder, then at Chaitin, no longer with fear or suspicion, but with a growing, palpable respect. A young woman, the one who had called him a savage, her face tear-streaked but alive, approached him hesitantly, her eyes filled with gratitude. She offered him a small, dried apple from her meager rations, her hand trembling. He accepted it, with a slight, dignified nod, a flicker of something almost like a smile touching his lips. Later, as we waited for the relief crew from Fort Sumner, Chaitin sat quietly, watching the vast, endless plains under the setting sun. I sat beside him, the silence between us comfortable, no longer awkward. We didn't speak much. Our conversation, largely in shared glances and the quiet, profound understanding that had blossomed between us. He explained, in his broken, accented English, that he had felt the subtle vibrations of the earth, the slight dip in the land that signified a weakening fault line ahead, a knowledge passed down through generations, a way of listening to the land that was alien to my scientific world. He knew the land spoke, he told me, if you only knew how to listen with your heart, not just your ears. The entire harrowing encounter changed me. Fundamentally, the railroad, with its rigid tracks, its precise instruments, and its predictable schedules, had always been my entire world. But Chaitin, the man they called Savage, had shown me a different kind of truth, a deeper, more profound wisdom rooted in intuition, in centuries of observation, and in an unbreakable connection to the earth itself. I left that train, not just a surveyor, but a man with a new understanding of the world and its people. The word savage now tasted like bitter ash in my mouth, a monument to my own ignorance and prejudice. Chayton, the man they had dismissed, had seen a fate I couldn't, a disaster invisible to my maps and gauges, and his ancient wisdom, born of a profound understanding of the land, had changed ours. I never saw him again after that day, his figure melting back into the vastness of the plains as silently as he had appeared. But the lesson he imparted, the silence he broke, the very ground he showed me, all of it resonated within me for the rest of my life. In the vast, unforgiving American West, sometimes salvation came not from what you built, but from who you truly saw, and from the wisdom you were finally willing to embrace.